For President George H.W. Bush, there was only one possible response to what he called naked aggression. Acting on the policy of the Carter Doctrine, and out of fear the Iraqi army could launch an invasion of Saudi Arabia, U.S. President Bush quickly announced that the U.S. would launch a wholly defensive mission to prevent Iraq from invading Saudi Arabia under the name Operation Desert Shield.
Today, as president, I ask for your support in a decision I've made to stand up for what's right and condemn what's wrong, all in the cause of peace. In my direction, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, as well as key units of the United States Air Force, are arriving today to take up defensive positions in Saudi Arabia.
Saddam invaded Kuwait in August of 1990, and the first Bush administration, George H.W. Bush, they took the next, 5-6 months to work with the Allies. It was considerably different than what George W. Bush did when he invaded Iraq in 2003. So it was, I think, a fairly skillful diplomacy on the U.S. part, and a different notion than what we saw later, too, a notion simply of building a multilateral coalition, getting the Saudis to fund a good part of it, getting some of the NATO allies to come in and provide troops, weapons, and so forth, but the U.S. bearing the bulk of it.
For the U.S. troops that were to be the bulk of this coalition, deployment to the Gulf came as a huge surprise.
We never heard of the country. What's Kuwait? What's so great about it that it's part of our national security? We started learning about the resources and started learning about Saddam Hussein's capability. And at first we thought it was just like another piece of news story. Somebody invaded somebody around the world, but as time went on, we started getting more and more news trickled down to us that this was becoming a more and more serious matter and more maybe involved than just what we see on TV.
I was young, I didn't really know what a lot of people knew, the older people, which I came to find out, like Iraq and Iran fighting for 7 years, and then you start thinking, you're like, these guys have been fighting for 7 years, they're battle hardened, and I'd say there's some anxiety, but I mean, it wasn't really noticeable. We didn't have a problem with soldiers going AWOL or anything like that. People just started buckling down and doing what they had to do.
This wholly defensive doctrine was quickly abandoned when on August 8th, Iraq declared Kuwait to be the 19th province of Iraq. On August 9th, after a 14-hour flight, a group of 25 F-15s touched down at Saudi airfields. As the F-15s began their air patrols, the first units of the 82nd Airborne Division arrived in Bahrain and began setting up defensive positions. Along with the airborne troops, the legendary 1st Marine Division formed the nucleus of the massive seaborne force sent in response to Iraq's invasion of Kuwait.
Well, the primary goal at the time we were moving into the country and getting established, the primary objective was what they called the defense of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Our job was, we saw that Saddam had put the Iraqi forces up along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border. It looked like they were going to come at us, so what kind of plan could we come up with to thwart any kind of attack that would come into the theater? And so for the first month at least, everybody was pouring their efforts into a defensive plan. How do we get the logistics to soldiers that are fighting and retreating back, fighting and retreating back? And how do we keep those logistical lines intact with all that moving back? And we seem to move through that successfully.
As at Guadalcanal and the rush to Korea, the U.S. Marines were ordered to scrape together the tools of war to face a formidable foe.
The Army gets all the new stuff. They get all the new tanks. They get all the new trucks. They get all the new stuff. The Marines get, leftover stuff, and they just teach you from, again, boot camp. You're a Marine. You do what you got to do. Do whatever it takes to get the mission done. That's how they got the nickname Devil Dogs. They do whatever it takes to accomplish your mission.
Facing overwhelming odds, The troops referred to themselves as Iraqi speed bumps. During the early days of Desert Shield, a powerful 18,000-man amphibious task force steamed into the North Arabian Sea to add an important element to the Allied arsenal. The task force, with Marines from the 4th Marine Expeditionary Brigade and the 13th Marine Expeditionary Unit, included air, land, and sea assets tailor-made for coastal assault. These included Harrier attack jets and assault helicopters to provide air cover for infantry, and armor that would hit the beach aboard high-speed air cushion landing craft, LCACs. As the Marines took up defensive positions on land and at sea, General H. Norman Schwarzkopf, commander of U.S. Central Command, began to amass a force capable of removing the Iraqi presence from Kuwait. Thousands of ground troops poured into the Saudi desert. By the end of August, an airlift was in full swing, with a plane touching down every 22 minutes. Pilots began to talk about an aluminum bridge between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia. At the same time, ships were beginning to arrive at ports up and down the Saudi coast, carrying the infantry fighting vehicles and the main battle tanks of the armored formations that would lead the charge into the desert. The principal combat vehicles in these formations included the M1A1 Abrams tank and the Bradley fighting vehicle, in both its infantry and cavalry configurations.
The Bradley, what it brought to the table was an offensive capability. It carried the 25 millimeter chain gun and a tow that could be used in an offensive manner as well as in the defense. So, and it could move as fast as the Abrams. So the huge improvement over the 113 and even the Abrams, the improvement of the Abrams over the previous M60 was this rate of march. They were designed and developed for offensive style of warfare.
The newly fielded M1A1 Abrams tank included several improvements over the original M1. It carried a more powerful 120mm gun, possessed better armor protection, and had better protection against nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. Marine Corps tank units entered combat with M60A3. These vehicles provided the heavy metal necessary to stop the armored might of Saddam's army, which included large numbers of Russian-built T-72s and BMPs.
You know, T-72 was the best tank that they had. Most of their forces were equipped with T-55s or some T-62s. So their equipment was at best early Cold War equipment. So I knew their range of their weapon systems was far less than the Abrams. So I knew that in a firefight that I had the range overmatch. Also, their T-72, the best tank they had, utilized an autoloader. And from the basic course and the scout platooners course, we knew that the autoloader took several seconds longer to reload than the manned Abrams. So 2.5 seconds to reload a round on an Abrams would be considered slow. And I knew that I could probably get 3 rounds off before T-72 could re-engage.
Schwarzkopf now believed he had the upper hand. By early October, he told Powell the window of vulnerability had closed. The speed bump had become a wall.